Hey guys, this is your history lesson for Friday. I hope you have your history notes out, the little note thing that I have all those different people on. If you don't, pause this and go get it. Do pause and then play. And so we're going to be starting on page 206. Last time we had discussed, well, last time we had discussed the literature and science people from the age of the Puritans, but that was a little sidebar from our rulers of the that we had talked about. Remember, we had talked about Henry VIII was the king, and then he had Elizabeth as a daughter because he had no sons. Then Elizabeth had King James I as a son. King James I took too much power and put the power of Parliament down. Then King James had King Charles I and who took even more power, limited Parliament even more. That caused the English Civil War, where they executed King Charles I. Oliver Cromwell, the leader of the parliamentarians or Roundheads, comes to the throne and becomes a dictator essentially, which was backfired. It's not what the people wanted. After he dies, he puts his son into place, but people are like, yeah, we don't really want you. And then King Charles II, son of King Charles I, comes to the throne, and that's what we're going to talk about today on page 206. That him coming to the throne is called the Restoration, because he's being restored to the throne. That's what we're going to read today. King Charles II's coming to the throne was called the Restoration, for now the crown was restored to its rightful heir. King Charles II was known for his love of pleasure, unfortunately. And he encouraged the English people to disregard biblical standards, because he liked pleasure so much, doing pleasurable things so much, that he wanted to disregard the Bible, and the English people followed him in that. Soon England lost the righteousness, respect, and excellence that it had known under the Puritans. The Puritans were kind of strict, and they were very, very much rule followers and by the book. But the good thing about that was that they had a love for doing the right things. Now that that was gone, they were involved in a lot of sin. Few lasting works of literature were produced during this time. So there were a lot of different writers during the age of the Puritans. There weren't as many during this time. However, one book was written there that's still popular today, Danny Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. It's about a guy who gets stranded on an island. It's probably a little too tough for you guys to read, but it's a good book. What also happened during this time in the late 1600s was the plague. The reign of Charles II was marked by a religious persecution. They were persecuted religious people, and two big calamities. There's a huge calamities, like a really bad event, tragedy. Two really bad ones. The first calamity was the plague, a disease that started in the East and spread rapidly over Europe. Kind of sounds familiar with what we've had happen here, right? We've had a disease start in China and spread rapidly throughout Europe and then come to America, which is what happened. But the same thing happened then, but it was a lot worse than this coronavirus. This plague raged everywhere, but nowhere worse than London. The reason why is because London was so close together. Everybody was so packed in. It's kind of like the reason why the coronavirus is so bad in New York, is because everybody's so packed in tight. There's no room for people to kind of stay away from one another. Here in London, it was really tight, and this plague was so bad. It said whole families died within a few days. Some people were able to flee to the country and find healthier conditions, but the poor had to stay in the city to die of either plague or starvation. Like, it was really, really bad. It was to the point that like about a third of the people of Europe died. Think about that, 1/3 of the people. Right now, the coronavirus is sitting around, I don't know what the death rate is, but something like 0.6% of people who get it die of it, and that's not even that much of the population. I think our numbers right now, I don't know what our numbers are at, but like, let's say the deaths are, I don't know, 100,000 people have died of the coronavirus. That's 100,000 people out of 7.5 billion. That's like one person every, I don't know what the numbers would be. 100,000, one person every one person every like 10,000 or one person every 100,000. That's what the coronavirus is looking like right now. Maybe one person every 100,000 people die from it. The plague, was one person every 3 die from it. That's unbelievable. A third of the people. That's like, it's in some areas it was half the people died from it. I mean, if you had a family of 8 kids, half of them would be gone. 4 of them would be gone. It was like in a whole family sometimes died, and it happened so quickly too. Within a few days, it spread. The plague spread, and like your whole family would be fine. You'd have a family of, and this is when the families were big, as well. You'd have 10 people in your family, and all of a sudden, 3 weeks later, 6 of them are gone, and you only have 4 people left in your family. How crazy would that be? It was unbelievably tragic. Many people of the time said the plague was the punishment for the wickedness into which England had fallen. And this is something that people always have. This is a good question. You might be wondering that. Could a plague or something like that, or some tragedy, be punishment from God? No one knows. Okay? If anybody says this is a punishment from God for America's terrible behavior, I don't necessarily think that. I would never jump to that place. Could it be? Of course, anything could be a punishment from God or used by God in some way, but I wouldn't necessarily say that that's what it definitively is, because then it really, paints the tragedy in a much different light. I think it makes God out to, it might make God out to be something that he's not. He may not have sent a particular virus, a tragedy, or something like that. He may not have been responsible for it. Some people said the same thing after September 11th, that was God judging America. I would never say that. I'm not saying it wasn't God, but I would never seek to speak for God and say this was God, sending this on America or sending this on Europe at this time and stuff like that. Could be, but you can't. It's irresponsible to speak for God. What should be the response is, this is a wake-up call that we need to get back to God. Not saying it's God sending this, but we should use it ourselves as a wake-up call and say, what am I doing? Am I in sin right now? I need to come back to the Lord. Across the doors of plague-stricken houses, the people wrote, God have mercy on us. A very, very sad time. And now comes the second big calamity. In 1666, the second great calamity came. A great fire broke out in London. For 3 full days, this is a fire for 3 full days, the flames raged uncontrollably until much of the city was burnt to the ground. So back before this, London was all wooden buildings. They were built right next to one another. There weren't really any alleyways or whatever. They were just built touching. They were essentially built off of one another. And so you can picture what happened was that it was a really, really dry. It was a really dry time that year. It was very, very dry. Not a lot of rain. So the wood was very dry, and the whole city was made of wood. And this fire happened, and the whole city just burnt to a crisp. Whole sections of the city were just cinders, and thousands of people lost their homes. Some people died, and thousands of people were now homeless. However, it ended up being a blessing in disguise. Not that it's ever a blessing in disguise, but as always, a tragedy can have a silver lining. As much as I'm sad that I'm not in school right now, I also have more time to work in my house. Am I happy that we're not in school? No, I really want to be in school right now, but I just have a new house. So you always got to look for the silver lining of, like, as sad as I am that I'm not in school, I can use this time to work on my house. Or somebody might be like, as sad as I am right now, it's good because I get to spend more time with my family, or it's good because I get to read my Bible more, or something. You always should be optimistic and look at the bright side of things. And there's a bright side to this Great Fire of London. As sad as it was that people lost their homes, it was that it had 2 benefits, and you're going to have to know these 2 benefits for the test. It, number 1, burned all the plague germs away. So the plague had been ravaging London over and over and over again because all the germs in the air and on surfaces, the plague just kept coming up. But this fire burned through burned all the plague up. And secondly, it allowed this guy, Sir Christopher Wren, to design London in a new and better way, because London was really designed really poorly. But this guy was put in charge of it, and he designed London to be constructed in a way that made a lot more sense. So after Charles II, the next king, on page 207, I'm just going to do one more paragraph. The next king after Charles II was James II, so it goes James I, Charles I, Charles II, James II. James II, he was disliked by many English people. Many feared he would bring back the tyranny experienced under James I and Charles I. And in 1688, I wonder what year was King Charles II come to the throne? It doesn't say. But in 1688, the English, because they didn't really like this monarchy, they didn't like James I, they offered the crown to William and Mary of Orange. Doesn't mean they lived in an orange, but they were James's son-in-law and daughter. So King James II had a daughter. He didn't have a son, but he had a daughter named Mary, and she married a guy named William from Holland. And they said to him, this William of William and Mary, will you two be our rulers? And so they agreed. They said, sure. So when James I, Charles I, then there was the English Civil War for a little while. Then it was Restoration, Charles II. Then James II, very, very briefly. Nothing really important happened then. And then William and Mary came about. And what was very important about William and Mary's reign was that they brought it back to, they brought out an English Bill of Rights, which was, England had a Bill of Rights which were a whole list of all rights and privileges that people have. Like we have a Bill of Rights in America as well. It talks about we have the right to free speech, the right to private property, the right to protest, which nowadays is being challenged and everything like that. A lot of rights we have in our Bill of Rights. Well, English had a Bill of Rights as well, and England became a constitutional monarchy, which they were trying to be before, but James and Charles I were limiting that a lot. But so they actually got a legal piece of paper together that said these are the rights of the people, and everybody has to follow them. And so that was William and Mary, King William, and Queen Mary ruled that in that way. And after the death of King William, Queen Anne came to the throne. So that's where we're going to leave it, and that's where our dynasty, our royalty comes. Is now we're at Queen Anne. So I'm going to recap for you for the royalty in case you're wondering. It was King Henry VIII, and it had been guys before that, but we're starting with King Henry VIII. His daughter was Elizabeth I. Her son, James I, too much power. Charles I after him, even more power. English Civil War, because Charles I was executed. Oliver Cromwell, for a little bit of time, he's not a monarch. After he dies and his son is kicked out, Charles II comes back, monarchy restored, restoration. Then after Charles II is James II. Doesn't really do much. People didn't really like him very much. So after that, the throne was offered to James II's daughter, Mary, and her husband. So it's William and Mary of Orange. And that's where, if you've ever heard of the College of William and Mary, that's where their names come from. William and Mary. After they die, it's Queen Anne. So you may have been in Norwell, Queen Anne's Corner. Have you ever heard of that in Norwell? It's named after her. All right. Well, that's it. That's history for today.